In 1787, when the founders sat down and drafted the U.S. Constitution, there was no mention of political parties. However, it was known that factions would rise up, and they soon devolved under our nation's founding fathers. One faction that rose was entitled the Federalists, which favored a strong centralized government and a national banking system. Among the Federalists were George Washington, John Adams, and Alexander Hamilton. In 1792, another faction arose. The supporters of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison formed the Democratic Republican Party. The party was supposed to be a party that favored limited government. George Washington, a Federalist, said in his farewell speech, quote, "However, political parties may now and then answer popular ends. They are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion." End quote. So a pretty stark warning by the president that apparently wasn't paid attention to. Because in the election of 1800, the Democratic-Republican Party dominated the early government, with Thomas Jefferson defeating the Federalist candidate John Adams. And this was entitled The Revolution of 1800s. The Federalists slowly began to dissolve until they dissolved completely after the War of 1812. But then came 1824. In the 1824 election, 4 Democratic-Republican candidates ran against each other, and Andrew Jackson won the popular vote in 99 electoral votes. No one had an electoral majority, however, so the election went to the House of Representatives. The House ended up declaring victory to John Quincy Adams. Now, this infuriated some of the Democratic Republicans. So New York Senator Martin Van Buren helped build a new political organization, the Democratic Party, to bring back Jackson, who defeated President Adams easily in 1828. Now President Jackson, in his term, vetoed a bill renewing the charter of the Bank of the United States in an election year, and thus his opposers founded a new political party, titled Whig Party, led by Senator Henry Clay of Kentucky. 8 years later, the Democratic Party and the Whig Party dominated the U.S. political system, and the Democrats won all but 2 presidential elections from 1828 to 1856. However, in the 1850s, a new debate arose. A debate on whether slavery should be extended into new Western territories. Southern Democrats favored slavery in all territories, while the Northern Democrats thought that each territory should decide for itself. In 1854, the Republican Party was founded, and in the 1860 Democratic National Convention, the Southern Democrats nominated John C. Breckinridge, while the Northern Democrats backed Stephen Douglas. And this split in the Democratic Party helped Abraham Lincoln, the Republican nominee, to victory in the 1860 election. Also, it helped the Union victory in the Civil War, and the Union victory in the Civil War left Republicans in control of the 19th century, and during Reconstruction, the Democrats solidified its base in the South. Because the South opposed the Republicans' measures protecting civil voting rights for African Americans, in the mid-1870s, the Democrats succeeded in rolling back many of the Republican reforms, including Jim Crow laws enforcing segregation. As the century drew to a close, the Republican Party had been established as the party of business. The Democratic Party, on the other hand, identified with the agrarianism and conservative values. However, in the progressive era, which spanned the turn of the century, the Democrats noticed an actual split between its conservatives and more progressive members. And in 1896, a very important stance by the Democratic nominee William Jennings Bryan as advocated to an expanded role of government in ensuring social justice. However, he did not win the election, but that advocacy, the advocacy of expanding roles of government and ensuring social justice, would be a part of the Democratic ideology for the foreseeable future. In the early 1900s, the Republicans dominated national politics during the Roaring Twenties, but then everything came to a stop. And on October 29th, 1929, a date which is entitled Black Tuesday, the stock market had crashed and thus initiated what is now known as the Great Depression. And in 1932, Franklin Delano Roosevelt won the White House. He became the first Democratic president since Woodrow Wilson in 1922 to hold the nation's highest office. In President Roosevelt's first 100 days, he launched a slate of federal relief programs known as the New Deal. And this began an era of Democratic dominance that would last, with a few exceptions, for nearly 60 years. In 1948, President Harry Truman introduced a pro-civil rights exceptions platform. A certain group of Southerners walked right out of the party's national convention after President Harry Truman introduced this pro-civil rights platform. They named themselves, the people who stormed out, the Dixiecrats, and they ran their own candidate for president, which was the governor of South Carolina, Strom Thurmond. And Strom Thurmond, in that election, got more than 1 million votes. However, many Dixiecrats did revert back to the Democratic Party, but this incident was the major shift in the party, because at the same time, many black Americans who voted Republican since the Civil War began voting Democrat during the Depression, and this would continue in greater numbers when the Civil Rights Movement as the Civil Rights Movement was quickly approaching. After the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, President Lyndon B. Johnson, a Democrat from Texas, signed into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 into law. Believe it or not, when he was signing the bill, President Johnson was said to have said, quote, "I think we just delivered the South to the Republican Party for a long time to come." End quote. And sure enough, in the late 1960s through the 1970s, more and more white Southerners voted Republican. Not solely based on the issue of race, but also due to Christians' opposition to abortion and other issues. The Republicans ruled in politics for a long time after this, until in 1992, when Bill Clinton defeated the incumbent George H.W. Bush. President Clinton's term in office led the country through a period of economic prosperity, but ended with a scandal that ended up getting him impeached. He was acquitted, however, and his vice president, Al Gore, ran against George W. Bush in the 2000 election. He lost a controversial election that came down to one state and one Supreme Court ruling. Throughout the presidency of George Bush, the Democrats rallied their base in opposition to the Iraqi war, and they regained control of the House and Senate during the midterms. This was all leading to a Democratic president, and in 2008, sure enough, a senator rode the wave of popular discontent and economic concerns during the Great Recession: Barack Obama. President Obama became the first ever African American to hold the nation's highest office. However, due to the opposition to Obama's policies, the Republicans did gain in Congress during Obama's 2 terms in office. Barack Obama passed major legislations, shifting the party from a moderate party to a progressive party. One of these progressive movements was to legalize gay marriage and also passing Obamacare. Obama also strengthened the rights for women to abortion. In 2016, Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of State, captured the Democratic nomination, becoming the first female presidential nominee of any major party in the United States history. The Republicans brought up a candidate who was a businessman and a reality TV star, Donald Trump. Beyond all expectations, Donald Trump won the 2016 election. And this brings us to today, where the Democrats have heavily opposed Donald Trump and brought forth former Vice President Joe Biden to challenge him in the 2020 election, an election that is still going on while several media sources have declared Joe Biden president. Joe Biden picked the first ever African American woman to be his vice president, Kamala Harris. Harris is a far-left leaning progressive, and the truth is that much of the Democratic Party is trending in that direction, and there are few moderate Democrats left. So how did the Democrats go from a party built upon limited government to policies that are far from what the Founding Fathers intended? I believe it goes back to Lyndon B. Johnson in 1964 landslide. Since LBJ's 1964 landslide, Republicans have won more of the white vote than Democrats in every single presidential election. And initially, this led to Democrats losing the presidency quite frequently, but as the share of the non-white population has grown, Democratic prospects in presidential elections have improved, and the party has won the popular vote in 5 of the last 6 presidential elections. Every year, the non-white proportion of the electorate grows by almost half a percentage point, meaning that in every presidential election, the minority share of the vote increases by 2%, a huge amount in a closely divided country. Jonathan Chait has written, end quote. And by 2020, he added, quote, non-white voters should rise from a quarter of the 2008 electorate to 1/3, end quote. So, at the end of the day, the Democratic Party had to switch to this radical left movement and this progressive movement because they were not winning elections without the white vote. They had to get back the progressives and they had to get back the far left candidates. So at the end of the day, the Democratic Party is undergoing an incredible transformation before our very eyes. The party is becoming younger, more diverse, more progressive. We can ask an endless series of questions, but the broader truth about the Democrats' incredible transformation is abundantly clear. Driven inexorably, by long-term demographic and ideological trends, the party's elected officials, or at least the victorious primary candidates, are finally starting to look even more like the coalition of human beings that they represent. And as the widely progressive and democratic-leaning younger generations age in political participation, they are dragging the party, sometimes kicking to the left. Dan Lipinski, Joe Manchin, and the DCCC, all of the actual and perceived centrist star and the constellations in the party's galaxy, are powerless to stop any of it. The younger progressive left won't destroy the Democratic Party. Eventually, they will become the party's establishment. The question is, will the people accept that shift? We will know very soon in years to come.